This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. It feels like we've been preparing for this day, the NFL draft, to come for like months, years almost. And it's finally upon us. The NFL draft is literally a day away from the time that you guys are going to see this video. So much to talk about. One of the things that, since, you know, most teams are talking about the top of the draft, they're talking about Caleb Williams, talking about the quarterbacks, talking about whatever anybody's going to do with J.J. McCarthy. One of the, I think, biggest talking points that's going under the radar is just the makeup of this draft class. I think people within the draft community itself have had this conversation, but I don't think many people outside of it have. And this draft class is a little bit older, right, than it usually is. And that has something to do with the COVID rules, but it's also smaller. And I'm wondering, because like the college football landscape, it seems like it is rapidly changing. Like, I don't think we're even close to seeing what that's actually going to end up looking like in like, because we're like 5 years away from it actually like looking like whatever it's going to look like. With all of this stuff going on at the same time, right? This wild change that college football is going over with NIL, with, you know, eligibility rules and all that. Do you think this draft is kind of the new normal for the NFL?
I think it'll be the new normal for a 1 to 3 year span, right? I think as those COVID transfers start to wear out, and as guys start to really figure out their situation with, I think the transfer portal has gone a long way into shortening the length of the prospects that we see, because, you know, you're not having guys stay at the same place for 3 or 4 years anymore. He's at one school for 1 year. He's at another school 2 or 3 years later. So they never get the proper amount of film and never get the proper amount of reps to become a great prospect. So I think that's going into the fact that the classes are becoming smaller, like you said. So when you put the age in there because of the COVID rules, guys staying longer, then you put the transfer portal kids that are also like moving around and not being able to establish themselves as prospects. That's what you see when you see the draft pool really shortening. So I think it'll level itself out within, you know, the next 2 to 3 years. But for the next year, maybe all the way up to 3 years, I think this will be what we see in the draft for the next couple of years.
Yeah, college football is at this interesting place where it is at one point a product for entertainment, an individual entity, and on the other, it is kind of the de facto farm system for the NFL. And right. I wonder, like, it just seems like a lot of those two purposes seem to be clashing like recently. Like, that's what a lot of this is. It's like, well, if you have the transfer portal, like, that's not great for NFL teams because they're not getting that look of a player like progressing in an offense and knowing, okay, this is what you did in year 1, this is what you did in year 2. Now it's like, well, you know, he was in a new offense. And then it's, well, you know, he was in a new offense again. And it's like, how do you project these things? Like, from your perspective, if you're somebody trying to evaluate a player for the NFL, how has that changed dramatically over like the last 5 years based on all these things that has happened with the NCAA in the last 5 years?
Well, it's kind of funny. Like, as a fan, first and foremost, it's like, I hate how much is blended into like NFL Junior, because that's why we like college football. It gave us a lot of unique aspects, especially when you talk about the crazy endings with the games and how long the games were and how much you were always in the football game. And you're losing a lot of that with the clock rules. And then now there's a 2-minute warning in college football. You're just losing so much of the identity of what college football is. And it becomes a little bit harder to identify guys, because when you have that, coaches then have to adjust their scheme. You're going to get a lot of guys that are running the ball more primarily now. We're still going to see some of these offenses that just come out and throw the ball all over the field, right? These spread offenses and verticality. But a lot of guys started to run the ball a lot more last year because it's a running clock now, and you want to take over the game. And it was times where you can go 8-9 minutes where a team controls the ball in a single quarter, and that's something that we weren't used to seeing in college football. So it's harder to evaluate, especially, I think, in my opinion, offensive players from that perspective, because I think the offense is going to start to change a lot more. Defense is a little bit easier because it's still a lot of just instincts. All right, read and react, identification, form tackling, fitting gaps. Like that's stuff that you could pretty much easily identify in any offense. But excuse me, against any offense. But when you are evaluating the offensive players, primarily the quarterbacks, in my opinion, it's becoming a lot harder because a lot of this stuff doesn't translate to the NFL. They're not running NFL style offenses. So it's become a little bit more difficult, but I think it'll, like I said, balance itself out. Everything does, and everything's cyclical in football. It'll start to balance itself out, and we'll get some new offense that kind of revolutionizes the game, and then you'll see it lagging behind, and then 2 or 3 years later, we'll see everybody else start to pick bits and pieces of that out. So I think it'll become a little bit easier to evaluate guys, but it's definitely been an adjustment the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to me, somebody who like remembers the era of college football where like the NFL was struggling to keep up with like what they were doing and like the changes that they were making to the game, and like to watch it now, and it's like a lot of people are taking less chances at that. And I think that's the one thing I really liked about college football was like, hey man, people just do stuff. like
100%.
Yeah, and like when Georgia Tech went away from that triple option, I was like, well, see now.
We losing recipes, man. Navy didn't run triple option this past season. We losing recipes, man.
Yeah, Navy ain't running the triple option anymore.
Nah, man, it's crazy.
Come on, man. Like we need this, right? Like, but let's talk about some of these draft prospects. The Browns, they don't pick until day 2, day 3. They have picks 54, 85, and day 2. When you look at this draft, when you look at prospects under 23, because we know Andrew Berry prefers younger prospects, who do you like in that range? And what positions do you feel like are strong with that age gate in mind?
I think the tackle class is pretty deep, and they're pretty young for the most part. So I really do like a lot of the tackles, and I'm not sure how deep the Browns are in the tackle market, to be honest. I mean, they picked up Jed's option, if I'm not mistaken. So they picked up Will's option. And Big Thanos, Dewan Jones had a really good rookie season. So I think he's going to be the right tackle of the future. But the tackle class, you can never have enough depth. And y'all learned that last year because so many guys got hurt for the Browns. So you never have enough tackle depth. So I like a lot of the tackles. I like a lot of the wide receivers as well. I don't know how deep they are in the wide receiver market or what specific skill sets they need. But there's a lot of talent there at wide receiver. So those 2 position groups will be the most intriguing, in my opinion. And then I think there's some defensive linemen that people are sleeping on the interior that could give a team like the Browns some help. So those 3 positions are positions that I would really value there with the day 2, day 3, early day 3 pick. And those are the positions that they can really find some value.
Who do you think? Who are your guys in the interior defensive line?
Oh, so I love a kid named Dwayne Carter from Duke. Got a chance to see him down there at the Senior Bowl, and Riley Leonard is from my hometown, so I know the kid. He grew up with my little brother, so I watch a ton of Duke games. So I'm watching for Riley, and then this kid on the defensive line keeps taking over games. So it was a really good opportunity for me to see him down there up close in person. And there was some really good offensive line talent at the Senior Bowl, and he stood out in my opinion. I mean, he's like he's a little bit bigger, not quite as quick as a Byron Murphy, but they do a lot of the same things in terms of disrupting games, eating gaps, shooting gaps, being disrupted. So I really like that guy a lot. I think he's a guy that I think is a little bit different of a body type than maybe what the Browns have been used to. He's a little bit more short, compact, and quick. But man, he does great against the run. I think he's the guy that can help a team like the Browns out for sure. So he's my guy in terms of picking a guy from that interior defensive line that I really like. But there's another kid from Alabama named Justin Aboybe, who's a little bit versatile. I think he's more of an early day 3 guy, maybe a round 4 type of guy. But you talk about versatility, being able to be a 3 tech, being able to maybe line up and play some zero nose a little bit because of his quickness and his arm length, and maybe being able to kick out and play a little bit on the edge if you need him to play edge and set some edges and play the run. He gives you a lot of versatility with his skill set and his frame, because he's a frame that could, in my opinion, bulk up and add another 10 pounds or lose another 10 pounds if he needs to, and it gives you a lot there. So those 2 guys on the interior of the defense line I really like.
Yep. All right, let's talk about left tackle, man, because the Browns are in an interesting place with left tackle because they have Jed under his 5th-year option. They have Dewan Jones there, who's going to be the right tackle. but
Right.
they're not sure if they're going to extend Jed after this year, right? And Jed has had some consistency issues at the left tackle position that have led you to wonder if he's going to get extended by his original team. Like, he's definitely going to get a contract to start somewhere,
Right.
but it's a question of like, is that the player you spend a ton of resources on? Or do you want to just bring back JOK or somebody like that with similar money? So I think the Browns are in a position where they're going to want somebody just in case that they feel decent about if they have to start, if they don't get anybody in the first round next year or in the second round this year. When I look at this class, I have 5 guys that I'm like, I would be thrilled if the Browns could get one of them at the tackle position. Roger Rosengarten, Kingsley Sumatia, KYRON Amagaji, Christian Jones, and Blake Fisher are my guys on that list. I know you've talked about Roger. We even talked about him after the Senior Bowl because he did have a great Senior Bowl. He ran like a sub 5.42 at the combine.
Yeah, ran sub 5.
So, well, what do you think of Roger? And like, how do you project if he can switch to left tackle in the pros?
I love Roger a lot, man. He's a guy that I believe has the ability to be a plus starter pretty early. So I think he could play left tackle. He played a little bit of left tackle at Washington. He also played left tackle at the Senior Bowl. He was doing right and left. He was switching back both sides, and that's also something that you need in terms of if you're going to draft a guy. Let's say they took him at 54. If you're drafting a guy that high, you need to get some value back if he's not going to be a starter right away. So the ability to play right and left is something that you really, value because the Browns have had a lot of tackle injury over the last few years. So he's a guy that I think that can play on either side. He has long enough arms. I mean, they're not, league standard, but in my opinion, he times his punch so properly. He has such good feet. He's such good of an athlete. He switches up his pass sets. Sometimes, he takes a short step and then boom, he's literally running at a defensive end in pass protection. I've never seen anything like it. He's one of the few guys, there's a jump set, but I don't even know what to call that a jump set. He literally runs at the kid. So I see him switch it up. He throws a 1-arm stab in there sometimes. And, he just switches up his pass rush sets very well, and he times his hands so well. I'm not as concerned about the arms not being league standard because they're an eighth of an inch too short. I mean, it just doesn't really matter to me with him. So I think he's a guy that I would be shocked if he did fall to 54, in my opinion, at this point. I think he's a guy that could, I don't think he's going to go back into the first round, but there's some scouts and some NFL guys that think he may be a late first round talent. I think he's that middle of the second round type guy. I think he goes anywhere from 40 to 50 there. And he's the type of guy that I think teams may even trade up for because he's that talented of a prospect. So if there was a scenario where the Browns could get a Roger Rosengard, that would be a massive W for them.
It's a fascinating thing, the draft process, because the last time we talked about Roger, we were like, yeah, I know he's listed as a 4th round pick, but and now we're getting to the point, it's like he might not get past 30.
It's crazy.
Yeah, you wonder, like, was it always like that? Was the Senior Bowl something that kind of spurred that thing, or like, were we just off on the original projection on him? But there's always a lot of players, like even Kingsley, right? Kingsley was somebody who was regularly getting mocked to the Browns 54, but that stopped pretty fast in the draft process. I think immediately after Senior Bowl, now I've seen him go as high as like 23 like in some of these mock drafts. What do you think of Kingsley out of BYU?
I'm not as high on him as others, and it's not because I don't think he can play. It's just for where I think he's going to get drafted, right? I think Roger, just using him as like, the standard here, his feet are so much better. His base, he operates from a better base. He has more advanced timing and sets. So the things that Roger has to improve is just like functional strength. I can get that in the weight room. I can get that by, just experiencing the game speed of the NFL and playing against those type of guys. With Kingsley, I think he has so much more technique to refine. He's a little bit more off kilter. I say he's not as balanced. He's on the ground more than I like a guy like that to be. But with all that said, he has a ton of talent. So I can understand why somebody will see a guy like that and think they can get all the talent out of him because he does show a lot of good things on tape. He does have a little bit of a mean streak. He is a powerful kid once he gets his hands on you. I like a lot about Kingsley. And I think a lot of the guys that we're talking about here, this day 2 range, are going to get maybe bumped up a little bit more because I think the tackle run is going to start anywhere from but from 5 to like 22. We could get like 6 tackles in that range right there. So I think it's going to be a big run on tackles, and then the rest of the teams are going to be incredibly valuable. The guys like Rosengarten, not Christian Jones, the Jordan Morgan from Arizona, Kingsley. Those guys are going to become extremely valuable because those are the next cream of the crop. And then after those guys, it's a steep fall off the tackle. So those guys might go a little bit higher just because of the value that they hold at the tackle position, and everybody needs so. But I do like Kingsley, and I think he's a guy that, in the right situation, I think the Browns would be a good place for him if he can develop and have a little bit of time to round out the fine edges of his game. He could be a guy that could be a plus starter as well.
What do you think, KYRON Omagaji from Yale? Like, because it's hard to project these Ivy League guys. Because
yeah, man.
Because like I watch a lot of FCS. I went to Youngstown State, so I watch like a lot of FCS football.
And beat us in the playoffs, my last game.
I was at that game. But it's always interesting with that because like some of the things that people like when they project the FCS is like, I don't think people know how good the Missouri Valley is at times. I don't think people know how good like the CAA can be or the Big Sky. And even like when you were there with Jacksonville State, I think the Ohio Valley was at a pretty strong place. Yeah. And like, I think people just see FCS as every FCS conference is the same. But like there is a difference between like who goes to Yale and who goes to one of those other
North Dakota State.
Like because North Dakota State could basically be Minnesota in the Big Ten, like today.
No question. They're like 8-1 against their last non-FBS opponents, and the one loss was a fourth quarter where they had a 10-point lead. Like those teams are very seriously competitive. So I 100% understand what you're saying. People, the difference is not as big as people would like to assume from a high-power FCS to a G5 program, even some of the P5 programs.
So with the projections, I feel like kind of get wonky when people try to do it from the FCS, especially when not familiar with how that landscape works. But the Ivy League thing is like, oh, now that is a thing, right? Like you could look really great against Ivy League competition, but even if you like look at the UFL, there's not a ton of dudes who are playing at the Ivies, like in that level of play. So it's difficult to kind of make that projection with him. I mean, like the build is there, the skill set. He's somebody I'm like, man, I wish you were at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, 100%. He's a guy that is just. It's tough because, like you said, man, high-level FCS football, if he was a high-level FCS kid, I would feel a lot better about his prospects because I would have seen him up against some NFL-level talent. I would have seen him up against some actual NFL guys from P5 schools because high-level FCS schools are playing 1 or 2 P5s a year where you can get a good gauge on their skill set and what they would look like against that caliber of talent. So while I like the measurables, I like all the athleticism and all he's the perfect word prospect, right? Like when you think about what he could be, if you can mold a guy, and like I said, every coach is the most arrogant person in the world. They think they could take anybody with talent and turn them into an all-pro. So he's a guy that I think coaches will fall in love with. Front offices will fall in love with. Smart kid, all the measurables, all the talent, but I didn't see him consistently dominate the level of talent that he faced. And that's a little bit of a concern for me. I'm not saying that he can't, be a quality starter eventually, but he's not a guy that I would spend prime capital on, and I consider prime capital rounds 1 through 3. I wouldn't take him in the first 3 rounds. And even being honest, I mean, you look at the draft. I mean, Dawan Jones got drafted 4th round, I believe, last season. So I bet they consider him a prime pick now. Like really, all of these picks are prime picks. They're extremely valuable. So he's a guy that I would, follow with caution. I like him. I just wouldn't want to be the one to take the risk to try to develop him.
Yeah, it's always like you can see how it can go right, but you're like, it depends on where you're at. Like you got to be a coach and a team in a pretty secure place, right? If you're going to take them, especially like earlier, because that can be one of them picks people hold against you if it doesn't work 100%. Out. Christian Jones, tackle out of Texas. I thought he had a fine Senior Bowl. He gives you like classic left tackle tape. Like it doesn't do anything like too crazy, but it's like okay, like at least in his past sets, he has pretty clean sets. But what do you think of him out of Texas, and what round projection do you think he's going to give you?
He kind of surprised me a little bit because I watched him the Alabama tape very heavily, and man, he's just a road runner. He moves people off the ball. I think in terms of his prospects in the run game, he's going to translate just fine. But he doesn't have the most fleet foot. Like he's not the most athletic, dynamic guy. But he has long arms. I mean, I have his measurements down. He has 34 and 7/8 inch arms, 6'5", 318. I mean, he's athletic enough, and I think you see it all the time. Like when I was watching the Bama tape, he was doing just enough, and then you get to the Senior Bowl. Man, nobody's really just beating this kid clean. He's not really dominating. He's not really putting kids and embarrassing them and having these, freak shows. But he also ain't getting beat. So I'm like, man, this is the cream of the crop, right? This is Senior Bowl where we're talking about elite prospects and people that are going to play on Sundays. I believe the Senior Bowl has like an 85% draft rate or something like crazy like that. So you're going up against guys that are going to be drafted, going to play in the NFL. And he looked really, really good. I mean, nothing sexy about it, but when you put on the tape, the run game is where I think he's going to excel. I think he's a guy that can survive in pass pro, but be excellent in the run game. And if you can get a guy that can be effective, pass blocking, and then be dominant in the run game, we're talking about working with something here. I think his range is like anything from 80 to 120 is where I think you see a guy like that go. Even though he's a little bit older, he's played in a ton of games. I think I have it up here. This guy's played in 61 games and started in 48 of them. So he's played a ton of college football, and it should be a good thing noted there because he hasn't had a serious injury history at all either. So durable kid, that's something that needs to be evaluated as well. So I think there's a lot to like about this guy. It just has to be in the right scenario. So I think he is an AFC North type of body. You get him in somewhere cold and nasty where he can be in a run heavy offense and be physical and impose as well. I think he can really succeed.
All right, and then the last guy that we're going to talk about, Blake Fisher, tackle out of Notre Dame. He's somebody I've seen everybody kind of be everywhere with at one time. Right. What are your thoughts on Blake?
I like him. I'm really high on him. I was high on him last year. I kept watching for Joe Alt, and I'm like, man, who is this kid on the right side? Because he's so athletic. Like, he moves better than Joe Alt. And Joe Alt's a very fluid mover. He's smooth. But Blake Fisher is an incredible athlete. And I was like, man, who is this kid? And he has long arms as well. He's a guy with 34 plus inch arms, 6'6", 313 pounds. And he has a little bit of a mean streak in him. He's not as physically powerful as a guy like a Christian Jones or even a Kingsley. But if you talk about the effort that he plays with, he's a finisher. He's a dog, much like Rosengarten is. I think some of these kids are a little bit lighter in the butt, being 315, like sub 320-ish. And I think that's where you get a lot of this athleticism from. You get a lot of this effort and strain that these guys have because these guys are getting out of space and on screens and getting up to second level. And this is the fourth quarter, and they're still going. That's something that you really didn't see from offensive linemen until the last 6-7 years in terms of being able to do that for 4 quarters. And I think some of the weight coming down has a lot to do with that. Like 10 years ago, this kid probably been 330, and now he's 313 and lean and moving. But I really like him, man. He really caught my eye last season, the 22 tape against Clemson. I remember he had a couple of reps where he's throwing one-arm stabs and then clamping with his right hand, and that's pretty advanced stuff for a college sophomore. He was a true sophomore at the time, so that really caught my eye. And then I think he followed it up this year with another great year. He had one game where I thought he struggled a little bit, and that was against NC State this past season, but then came back right the next week and then finished the season very strong. So he's a kid that I think has day 2 talent. And I think he's going to be a guy that can play right or left tackle because of the athleticism, the arm length, and then the balance that he plays with. So he's a guy that I really like as well. And he's an interesting prospect because, like you said, there's some variance on him. But I don't think that you get this combination of length, athleticism, and effort very often. And he's such a young kid as well, too. I think he has a bright future ahead of him.
All right. And before we get out of here, since I know we both watch FCS football, we both watch spring football, I want to give a shout out to some of those guys. So who's an FCS prospect that you like in this draft that you think people are kind of low on? Mine would be like, I think Dylan Laub's a little bit like underrated.
Okay. Yeah, he's definitely a good prospect. I know he's getting some Danny Woodhead comparisons. So, I mean, listen, he held his own down there at the Senior Bowl. And if you put on his tape, he's dynamic, man. You talk about a guy that really takes over games and breaks, long run. So that's a great one. And I think mine would probably be Mason McCormick from South Dakota State. They would kill me for that one. From South Dakota State, playing guard on the interior there. I always watch those guys, and I've talked about those guys for a long time. because I think their offense has about 4 NFL players on it. Both of the Yankee brothers at wide receiver, I think, are going to play on Sunday. Isaiah Davis is a running back who the Browns should probably be eyeing, because I love that kid at running back, Isaiah Davis. And then you have Mason McCormick and a couple of other guys on the offensive line, but McCormick is just the typical nasty guard. He posted a highlight tape on Twitter, and it's just like heavy metal rock music blaring, and he's pancaking people. I'm like, that's what I want from an offensive lineman. So I like it. I think he has great balance. For his frame, he's not the biggest guy, but I think he can add with his frame, and he just plays with such a nasty, mean streak. He's the guy that you want on your team, even if it's just as a depth piece, because he's the guy that I could count to a guy like Nick Allegretti from the Kansas City Chiefs that, played as a backup and just filled in spots. And then in the playoffs, when, Tooney got hurt, they throw him in there and he dominates and they win the Super Bowl. Now he gets I think he got like a $15 million contract from the Washington Commanders as a starter. I think he's the guy that projects similarly to that, and a guy that can give you some really good depth in the middle rounds.
Let me tell you something about that South Dakota State team. They're just mean. Okay, they were mean and dominant this year. Like, they came, my alma mater, threw everybody around, and did the penguin waddle the whole game and beat us by 40.
Man, they're nasty. Yeah. They are nasty.
No.
And Gronowski's a really good quarterback. I'm surprised, like with the transfer portal we talked about a little bit, for them to be able to keep all those kids for 4 seasons, it's incredible, because I thought they would have been out of here a couple of years ago by one of those Pac-12 schools. So, man, definitely love that South Dakota State team. And Mason McCormick is a guy, he fits the type of Browns identity that the Midwest team will love. He would be a perfect pick.
I need a documentary one day on the arms race in Dakota football. Like, cause like, man, one of the most unspoken about things, like, all them Dakota schools got good out of, like, right. South Dakota used to not be good,
South
man.
Dakota's good.
Like,
North Dakota's,
yeah, like, all of them are good. Like, all of them are good. And they're not just good. They're putting dudes into the league. Yes. Like, you look at the guys that played at North Dakota State, you're like, oh my God. Like, right. It was a fascinating thing to watch rise, but yeah, that Dakota stuff needs to be studied. And again, Youngstown used to be a dynasty, and then the Dakota showed up. It ain't happened no more. Like, they don't look at us crazy, like that, man. No more. But
I'm happy that they stayed at FCS and didn't move up. A lot of talk of North Dakota State or South Dakota State, joining the Mountain West or something like that. I'm glad they stayed where they are, kept the tradition. So that made me happy too.
I know you glad. It would be nice for Youngstown State to be able to win 9 games. Like, yeah, it ain't happening as long as all them schools up there, but you gotta appreciate just the work that they've been able to do. And again, I need a documentary one day, because like, nobody ever talks about it, but like, something happened. Like, somebody figured something out up there, because there's no reason they should be that good at football in that state. 4 schools, but. Yep. Let's talk about some guys that you like in the UFL. It's been interesting since they merged this league. It's like, really, like, it's always been better quality football than I think people have gave it credit for. But this year, I'm like, man, like, there's some stuff where you're like, wow, Darius Victor don't look that good no more, right? Like, or like some things where you're just seeing like the transition of play get up there. Who's some guys that have really caught your eye this UFL season?
Well, I have the privilege to cover the Birmingham Stallions, so I'm at all their home games. I get to talk to those guys, and see those guys up close. And the guy that's really impressed me is Jake Sternberger, man, the tight end. I don't understand how he's not sticking in the NFL. I know he's not the best inline blocker ever, but in terms of pass reception ability and being a dynamic threat, that dude is all over the field. And this is the 3rd season in a row he's been pretty dominant at that level. So I know he's gotten some tryouts. I know he's been on some teams. I believe he's with the Packers for a little while, but the fact that he hasn't been able to stick is crazy. And I'm not 100% sure what the Browns' depth is like at tight end. I know they have Njoku coming off a career year, but man, he's a guy that I think can help any team in terms of stretching the field, red zone ability. Like, I love Jay Sternberger and what he's been able to do. An offensive lineman, Jordan McCray, he's an interior guy. I believe he had a small stint with the Browns, if I'm not mistaken. He was, I think he got cut at the final cut, but he's the guy that's been exceptional when you talk about offensive line, interior offensive lineman. So he's the guy that's caught my attention. I really like what AJ McCarron has done, but AJ McCarron needs no introduction, right? Like, we all know who AJ McCarron is, and he's the guy that turned down NFL contracts to go play in the UFL. So he just wants to get on the field, and He's a little bit older as well, so he probably should be doing what he's doing. But those guys have really caught my attention, and some of the defenders, AJ Hindy, a lot of these guys are older, so it's funny. Like I keep talking about them in terms of their prospect, but like these guys are really mature football players that have played professional for a long time, and they should be doing what they're doing at that level. So I'm really excited about them, and there hasn't been a ton of young guys to catch my eyes yet, but I'm sure as we get the weeks go longer and longer, I'll have some more young guys to kind of catch my eye.
Get it because it's in that like balance of like, hey, are you getting guys ready for the NFL? Or are you making like your own? Because like the league got so much better, but it's also like now you're in a situation where it's like Tease Tabor. I think he's been having like a pretty good year with the Birmingham. I mean, not Birmingham, the San Antonio Brahmas, and it's like, well, that's kind of the dude that's going down, like somebody who maybe doesn't have the high end athletic ability to kind of do what they do at the NFL level, but at a slightly lower level, they can do what they do, and they are very good at what they do. With Darius Phillips, I think they just have some good corners over there in Birmingham, in San Antonio. But
it's the perfect balance, though. It's like there's going to be a ton of guys leaving the NFL that want to still play football, and you help with name recognition and brand. And then there's going to be a lot of young guys who haven't got the opportunity, or maybe got one opportunity and want to get back. And those are going to be like the farm guys that get picked up and get to play or get a chance to get played. So I think it's a good balance for the league going forward.
Hey man, shout out to Skip Holtz. He's won won spring leagues 2 years in a row. He has the only undefeated team in the UFL right now, and he's done that all while ferociously switching quarterbacks the entire time.
like, every game.
Yeah. Because the first year he could not decide between Jamar Smith and oh my goodness, was it he won the MVP the next year, but he was Alex Magoo. Alex Magoo, right? Yeah. So he could not decide, even to the points where, like, I think Jamar got hurt in that first championship game, but like nobody ever told us what happened with him.
Yeah, and then Magoo came in second half, and then Jamar's the starter again for year 2, and then he breaks his thumb, and then Magoo wins the MVP, and then Magoo goes to the NFL. And now he can't decide between Corral and Martinez.
And Jamar's still there.
Jamar's basically coaching right now. I think he's still recovering from some injury, but it's funny because he's still on the roster too. So he's loyal to his guys at least.
Yeah, I'm like, and that is a fascinating thing. I'm like, what did he figure out? Like, because like it's also fascinating because it's not like, I know he's had good running backs there, CJ Marable, Bo Scarborough when he was over there, but it's one of those things that's fascinating to me because I'm like, the thing is that they be winning because they be throwing though.
Man, they control the game.
Victor Bolden was like a huge part of what they were doing that first year, and even they had wide receivers the year after. I think one of them still on the Browns. Austin Watkins or something?
Austin Watkins, yep. And Deion Kane, former Clemson kid. Like that, they got the talent, man.
I've never seen somebody be able to maintain this level of success while changing out quarterbacks this much.
Some very established G5 programs and some lower tier P5 programs have reached out to him as well, and he's like, I don't want to do the college thing anymore. He's like legit enjoying the UFL thing, so good for him.
Hey man, he found it. He figured it out. Like he figured out the recipe to spring football, because if he can do that at quarterback, I'm like, there's probably a bunch of other positions that are always in flux in spring football where he's like, nah, I know how to do this. Like he might end up being like the template for what this thing looks like, especially if he wins this league this year 3 in a row. It just kind of proves that he's been the best coach out there. And like, this is a league with real coaches, right? Like Wade Phillips,
100%.
Bob Stoops, AJ Smith, the offensive coordinator for the Brahmas, like, is somebody that I think a lot of people
Doug Williams is defensive coordinator in DC. Like, they got some legit NFL coaches, man. John Chavis was a 30-year SEC defensive coordinator, is the defensive coordinator for the Stallions. I mean, it's legit reputable coaches and legit good players, man.
Yeah, what he's doing is like legitimately impressive. Like, because it's not that big stage, I don't think people are noticing. But I'm like, nah, like, hey, that dude can coach. But KYRON, thank you for coming on, man. Let them know where to find you, where to get more of your work.
You can find me on Twitter at KYRON Samuels. And then I have everything else linked there, man. I have my website, The Pull and Guard, where I update on NFL, college football, transfer portal stuff. I've been doing a ton of radio as well. So everything that you can find from me, just follow me on Twitter, and I'll be posting it there. And I'm always interacting with people, having fun on there. So that's where you can find me, and then I'll link you to everything else from there. So, man, appreciate you for having me on again. anytime you need me, man, holler at me and I'll be there. So I enjoy doing this.
Definitely, man. Always fun to talk ball. Thank you, Kai, for coming on. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.